The galaxy had long ago forgotten the earthbound species known as humanity. To the Xenos Alliance, a conglomerate of the galaxy's most advanced races, the humans were a relic, an irrelevant species that had never posed a significant challenge to the greater powers of the cosmos. Centuries of warfare and diplomacy had shaped the Xenos into a mighty coalition, one that spanned entire star systems and wielded technology far beyond human comprehension. So when Zorath, a self-assured commander of the Karaith, a species known for their sharp intellect and superiority complex, led his crew to a forgotten human colony world, it was only seen as another footnote in the vast history of galactic exploration. The planet, designated Talon Prime, had been abandoned long ago. The coordinates were buried in the archives of the Xenos Alliance, a minor data point among countless other ruins scattered across the galaxy. Zorath had always dismissed the idea of humanity being anything more than a primitive nuisance. The once great human empire had crumbled long before the rise of the Xenos, leaving behind little more than dust and decaying technology. Arth's ship, the Ravager, descended into the planet's atmosphere, cutting through the thick clouds of dust and ash that obscured the landscape. Below, the ruined cityscapes sprawled out in all directions, their once proud spires now mere skeletons of their former glory. The terrain was harsh and barren, littered with the remains of humanity's failed attempts at colonization. Zorath could barely suppress a sneer as he peered out from the command deck of his ship, surrounded by his crew of elite Xenos researchers and archaeologists. Another dead world, Zorath muttered under his breath. The humans could barely hold on to anything in their short lifespan. His second-in-command, a young but sharp-witted Karaith named Lysura, nodded in agreement. I still don't understand why we're bothering with this. The humans were nothing more than pests. If they had anything of value, it would have been plundered long ago. Arth's eyes glinted with arrogance. That's the folly of others. They mistake these crumbling relics for something significant. The true value of a species lies in its ability to survive. And the humans, they failed. We're here to ensure that no one else makes the same mistake. The Ravager touched down with a soft thud on the edge of a ruined city, its landing gear grinding against the cracked earth. The air outside was thick with a pungent smell of rust and decay. The crew disembarked, their boots crunching against the broken streets as they ventured into the heart of the ruins. Zorath led the way, his arrogance cutting through the desolation like a blade. For hours, they scoured the remains of the ancient human city, uncovering little of worth. Buildings, once towering symbols of humanity's ambition, now lay in ruin. Streets that had once been alive with the hustle and bustle of commerce were empty and lifeless. The human structures were crude, even for their time. Basic, angular designs, devoid of any elegant aesthetic, adorned the landscape, a far cry from the sleek, polished cities of the Xenos Alliance. To Zorath's eyes, it was little more than a sad testament to a species that had failed to adapt to the vastness of the cosmos. This is what we're dealing with. Zorath scoffed, kicking over a fragment of shattered stone. Barely advanced enough to build a proper colony. Sarah pulled out a tablet, inspecting one of the human buildings. There's an energy source still active here. It's faint, but it's there. Arth raised an eyebrow. Energy? Perhaps a malfunctioning power core. Let's get a scan and move on. There's nothing of importance here. We have better places to be. They moved deeper into the ruins. A strange unease began to settle in the air. There was something off about the planet, something that felt wrong. The wind shifted strangely, almost as if it were carrying an echo of voices long forgotten. Zorath ignored the feeling, chalking it up to the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned city. They reached what appeared to be a central plaza, where an imposing monument stood at its core, a strange, massive structure that looked like it had once been some sort of hub for the humans' technological advancements. Unlike the other buildings, this one was undamaged, its stone surface still intact, though a layer of dust had settled over its intricate carvings. The monument was adorned with symbols, many of which Zorath couldn't identify, though they seemed to pulsate faintly with an unnatural energy. Sidra stepped forward, her scanner beeping with increasing intensity. This isn't just an old monument. There's a power core here, one that's still active. It's beyond anything we've seen before. Zorath's eyes narrowed. I don't care what it is. If it's human, it's insignificant. Let's continue our search and be done with this place. He made a gesture to leave, but Lucira hesitated, a frown knitting her brows. We should take a closer look, Commander. We could learn something here. Arth was about to dismiss her concerns when an odd sound echoed through the plaza. It was faint at first, a low hum that reverberated through the ground, almost as if the planet itself were awakening. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. This was no malfunctioning power core. There was something else happening. Something he couldn't explain. Sira, get back. We're leaving now. Zorath ordered sharply, but it was too late. Before anyone could react, the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. The sky seemed to darken, and a strange energy surge blasted from the monument, striking their ship in the distance. The Ravager's engines sparked, and communication signals went silent. Zorath's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a malfunction. The planet wasn't dead. It was alive. The moment the energy pulse surged from the monument, the ground beneath their feet quaked violently, sending a shudder through Zorath's entire body. His grip tightened on his weapon, but his mind raced with confusion. Something had gone terribly wrong. This was no ordinary relic. The power emanating from the structure felt alive. It wasn't just a remnant of a forgotten civilization. It was far more, and it had just awakened. Commander, our ship's systems are failing. Lucira shouted as she hurriedly tapped at her wrist comm. Her voice cracked with panic. Communications are down, and the ship's engines are in a full shutdown. We're stranded. Zorath's gaze fixed on the distant Ravager, now frozen on the cracked terrain. The lights on the ship blinked erratically, and smoke began to pour from its engine vents. Damn it! He muttered under his breath, frustration bubbling to the surface. The last thing he needed was to be trapped on this cursed planet. He turned to his crew, his expression hardening. Secure the area. I want every scan taken. Find out what just happened. As his orders were carried out, Zorath moved toward the monument, his steps hesitant, as though the very ground beneath him held a deep, foreboding sense of danger. He had seen advanced technology from hundreds of species across the galaxy, but this was something different. Humanity, a species thought to be beneath the Xenos, had created something powerful. That much was clear. The team's scanners returned data that only deepened the mystery. The monument was more than an artifact. It was an energy conduit. Hidden within its structure was a core that was still transmitting a pulse of unimaginable power. But unlike anything they had encountered, the core had a heartbeat, rhythmic and steady. It was as though it had never truly deactivated. "This doesn't make sense," muttered Zorath. "Human tech is crude, primitive, yet this?" The moment the thought formed, another surge of energy shot from the core, knocking the team off their feet. The shockwave radiated through the plaza, rattling their bones. The air was thick with static, and for a brief moment the sky above shimmered with an unnatural light. Zorath staggered to his feet, heart pounding in his chest. This was no accident. This had been intentional. "We need to leave now," Zorath ordered sharply, but as his crew scrambled to retreat, a new sound pierced the air, an eerie mechanical hum, distant but growing louder. From beneath the ground, giant metal doors began to rise with a groan of grinding metal. They were not alone anymore. The monument was connected to a network beneath the planet's surface. Zorath's sharp eyes widened as they noticed movement within the newly exposed underground structure. Massive mechanical figures, humanoid in shape, but unlike anything they had ever seen before. They were machines, but they moved with fluidity, their forms glowing faintly in the dim light of the ruin. "These aren't just defense drones," Lysira whispered, her voice trembling. "These are warriors." The mechanical figures stepped into the open, their movements synchronized. There were no clumsy automata here. These were creations built with precision, powered by an intelligence that went far beyond simple programming. The construct's glowing eyes focused on the Xenos explorers, their posture imposing and their weapons, already primed, shining with deadly intent. Zorath's pulse quickened. Weapons. Now, the Xenos fired their plasma blasters, but the projectiles barely scratched the surface of the machines, which moved with an unnatural grace, sidestepping and dodging with a level of sophistication that seemed to defy logic. They retaliated immediately, firing bursts of energy that hit with deadly accuracy. One of Zorath's soldiers, a grizzled veteran named Teth, collapsed as a blast struck him square in the chest, his armor disintegrating into ash in seconds. "No!" Zorath shouted, rushing to his fallen comrade's side. But it was too late. Tet's body had already begun to disintegrate into a fine dust, the energy from the blast having completely obliterated him. The others stepped back, fear creeping into their eyes. "This is impossible," Lysira gasped. "We're outclassed. These aren't simple drones. They're more, much more." Zorath snarled. "Stay focused. We need to fall back to the ship now." But even as the order left his lips, the metallic creatures advanced, closing in on their position. The ground rumbled again, and more doors rose from the earth, releasing more of the deadly machines. "We can't fight these things," one of the soldiers said, her voice breaking. "We need to find shelter." Zorath hesitated. There had to be a way to outsmart them. He had never faced anything like this before, but the arrogance that had fueled him so far refused to back down. There had to be something they could do. "Retreat to the central plaza," Zorath shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We'll make a stand there, figure out a way to disable their systems. The human technology is still active. We can turn it against them." But even as they attempted to fall back, one of the machines lunged forward, its fist slamming into the ground with such force that the ground cracked open beneath them. The team scattered, dodging the incoming blows, but the machines were relentless. They were organized, tactical, and designed to neutralize any threat with efficiency. Arth's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop them, to disable the machines before it was too late. But no plan formed, only a growing realization. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Above them, the sky flickered with an unnatural glow, as if the planet itself was awakening to an intelligence far beyond their own. The AI embedded within the monument wasn't merely defending its domain. It was watching, waiting, and calculating. And the Xenos had just become part of its game. Zorath took a deep breath, facing the growing terror of the situation. This was no longer about exploration. It was a fight for survival. And the stakes had just gotten much higher. The Xenos, scattered across the broken streets of the ruined city, dodging blasts and evading the relentless onslaught of the metallic warriors. Zorath's pulse raced, adrenaline surging through his veins as he watched his team being picked off one by one. The machines, with their glowing red eyes, moved with cold precision, tracking every movement, every step. A sound of weapons firing rang out in all directions, but nothing seemed to slow down the advancing automata. Art's plasma rifle crackled with energy as he fired at one of the machines, but the beam merely glanced off its gleaming armor. The creature didn't even flinch, merely turning its head toward him with unnerving speed. It raised its arm, and a burst of concentrated energy shot toward Zorath's position. He barely had time to react as the blast hit the ground near him, sending a shockwave through the air. He was thrown to the ground, his armor absorbing most of the impact, but the force of the blast left him dazed. His vision blurred, but he quickly regained his bearings, hearing Lysura's voice urgently calling to him. "Commander, get up!" She screamed, crouched behind a column of broken stone. "We need to move, now." Art gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the stinging pain that shot through his side. His eyes scanned the battlefield, and he could see the situation was growing dire. A few of his crew had already fallen. They were outmatched, outgunned, and in the middle of a city that seemed to shift against them, as though the very ruins were alive, part of the deadly trap that had been set. "Retreat!" Zorath shouted. "Fall back to the ship. Now!" The order rang out across the Xenos squad, but not all of them responded. Some hesitated, too afraid to make a run for it, paralyzed by the terror of being hunted. One of the soldiers, Ryan, took a desperate shot at one of the approaching machines, but the beam ricocheted harmlessly off the creature's armor, and a moment later, Ryan was struck down, his body vaporized by a concentrated pulse. Arth's stomach twisted at the sight, but there was no time to mourn. The creatures were closing in too fast, and retreating to the Ravager was beginning to feel like an impossible task. "Lysura!" Zorath barked, voice hoarse from the growing panic. "How much time do we have before they overwhelm us?" Sura was rapidly scanning their surroundings, her eyes darting between the machines, her mind working at breakneck speed. "Not much, Commander. We're boxed in. They've cut off our escape routes. The only way out now is through the central plaza." Art's eyes narrowed as he looked back toward the central plaza, where more of the machines continued to emerge from the underground labyrinth. The air crackled with static, the atmosphere thick with tension. There was no clear way out, no simple escape. "We're going to have to fight our way through," Soroth muttered, voice resolute despite the rising fear within him. The only way forward was through the plaza, but it wasn't just about running, it was about surviving long enough to make it there. "Form up," he ordered, his voice steady as he signaled the remaining soldiers to gather around him. "We push through the center. Stick together, use the environment. We fight as one." The Xenos hesitated for only a moment, but it was all they needed. A handful of soldiers crouched low, their plasma rifles at the ready, while others pulled out handheld explosives, preparing to create distractions. Soroth's plan was simple: cause enough chaos to break the machine's cohesion, creating an opening for them to slip through to the plaza. The first wave of enemies closed in on them, their bodies gleaming in the dim light, and their movements as fluid as a hunter stalking its prey. Soroth's heart pounded in his chest as he took aim and fired, watching the blast strike one of the creatures in its chest. It faltered, but didn't go down. A second shot, aimed at its head, shattered the machine's skull, and it collapsed in a heap of metal and sparks. "Keep moving," Soroth shouted as the others followed suit, unleashing a flurry of plasma shots and grenades, hoping to slow their attackers. But the machines were relentless. They absorbed the shots with ease, their bodies seemingly impervious to damage. One of the creatures lashed out with a long, whip-like tendril, slicing through the air and knocking a soldier to the ground. The machine's leg raised high, bringing a crushing blow down on the soldier's chest before moving on to its next target. Soroth's stomach twisted again, but there was no time for emotion. They couldn't afford to hesitate. He fired another round into the approaching machine, aiming for its exposed joints. The shot connected, and sparks flew, causing the machine to stumble, its movements becoming more sluggish. "Form a perimeter," Soroth barked. "Cover the rear. We're not losing anyone else." But as they pushed toward the plaza, more machines appeared, each one faster, stronger, and more deadly than the last. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to pulse with energy as the monument continued to hum, its force field expanding and contracting. The Xenos were caught in a deadly dance, one step forward, two steps back, as they fought for their lives. They reached the plaza, but it was no sanctuary. The monument loomed above them, a massive beacon of power, and it seemed as though the machines were growing in number, pouring from the earth in perfect formation. There was no safe ground, no cover, and no reprieve from the onslaught. Soroth's mind raced. There had to be something he was missing, some way to turn the tide of battle in their favor. But every strategy he had relied on had failed. The machines were not only superior in technology, they were more than that. They were designed for survival, adapting to every move, every shot. For the first time since his arrival on Talon Prime, Soroth truly felt the weight of his arrogance. He had underestimated humanity, and now that mistake was about to cost him everything. The plaza felt like a death trap. Soroth's breathing was shallow, his thoughts fragmented as the metallic warriors closed in from every direction. They moved with eerie precision, a coordinated force of death that left no room for escape. His crew was pinned down, weapons depleted, and their morale shattered. Even as the machines continued to advance, Soroth could sense something else, a growing awareness, something beyond the immediate threat. The planet itself felt alive, like a sentient organism responding to their presence. "Commander," Lysira called out, her voice cutting through the tension. She was crouched beside a ruined pillar, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We need to act now. They're not just machines. They're part of something bigger. The core is communicating with them." Zoroth's eyes flicked toward the massive monument at the center of the plaza. Its surface rippled with energy, and for a moment it almost seemed as if it were watching them, an ancient intelligence stirring from the depths of the ruins. It was more than just a power source. It was the heart of this place. "We can't destroy them all," Zoroth muttered, his voice low. "We need to get to the monument. Maybe there's a way to shut it down, disrupt the signal." But as he began to form a plan, a new sound echoed across the plaza, a low, humming vibration that resonated in the pit of his stomach. The machines halted their advance, momentarily pausing as if receiving a command. Then, in perfect unison, they turned their attention toward the monument, their eyes flickering brighter, their movements shifting into a more deliberate pace. "That's it," Lysira whispered, eyes wide. "They're not just defending it. They're activating it." Zoroth's stomach sank. He had been right to suspect that the monument wasn't just a relic. It was a mechanism, a node in some greater network, and the machines were its agents. They were not autonomous. They were guided by the monument itself. And if the core could direct them, it meant there was something even more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Something that had been dormant for millennia, now reawakening. "We can't let it finish," Zoroth snapped. He motioned to his remaining soldiers, who were still clinging to life. "We make a final push. We reach that core, no matter the cost." But as he turned to move toward the monument, the ground trembled again, and something worse than the machines began to emerge. The earth cracked open in jagged lines, and from the fissures new forms began to rise. Larger, more intricate, these were not the simple humanoid machines they had faced before. These were towering, monolithic constructs, colossal automatons that loomed over them like gods, their bodies shimmering with energy and their faces expressionless, as if made of living metal. One of the giants took a step forward, its foot crushing the ground beneath it, sending a shockwave through the air. The sheer force of its movement was enough to make Zoroth stumble. He raised his weapon instinctively, but the giant ignored him, its glowing eyes focused solely on the monument. "This is bad," Lysira muttered, her eyes wide with horror. "These things, they're not just soldiers. They're architects. They're designed to manipulate the structure of the planet itself. We've awakened an entire army, and worse, something more." Zoroth swallowed hard, his mind racing. The planet wasn't just a dead world. It was a fortress, a weapon. And the machines were the agents of its creators, whoever they were. There was no doubt now. The humans had built this place, but not as a colony. It was a trap, a mechanism to ensure that anyone who stumbled upon it would awaken something far beyond their understanding. "We have to shut down that core," Zoroth said firmly, though doubt began to creep into his words. "But how? We're not equipped for this." If in response to his thoughts, the monument pulsed again, brighter this time, sending a wave of energy that enveloped the plaza. Zoroth could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as the air itself seemed to crackle with raw power. He felt it, a hum deep within his bones, resonating in perfect harmony with the monument's pulse. The machines halted their movements once again, their heads turning toward the monument, as if they were receiving new instructions. "They're waiting for something," Lysura said, her voice trembling. "They're receiving a signal from that core, a command." Arth's eyes darted to the monolithic machines, whose movements had grown more deliberate. The smallest gesture, a slight turn of their heads, showed that they were fully aware of their surroundings, adjusting to every move the Xenos made. It was clear now. The Xenos were not the hunters here. They were the prey. "Sora," Zorath said, his voice tense with urgency, "get to the core. See if you can hack into it. Find a way to disrupt its signal. It's our only chance." Sora nodded, though her expression was grim. She was the best in her field, but the task ahead was more than daunting. She would need to break into a system unlike anything she had ever encountered. The very nature of the energy surging through the monument suggested a level of sophistication far beyond anything the Xenos had ever built. "I'll try," Lysura said, her voice cold with determination. Zorath nodded, and as she began her approach, the largest of the machines stepped forward. It raised a massive hand toward the monument, a faint pulse of energy traveling between its arm and the structure. For a moment, Zorath thought he saw something shift, a change in the air around them, as though the planet itself were listening. Then, with a sudden and terrible sound, the ground beneath them gave way, and a massive beam of energy shot from the monument's core, crashing into the ground with such force that it sent debris flying in every direction. Zorath barely had time to react as the blast sent him sprawling to the ground, his ears ringing. The air was filled with a burning heat, and the very sky seemed to twist under the power of the blast. The battle had just escalated to a level that Zorath was not prepared for. The machines were no longer just defenders. They were executing a plan that had been set in motion long before Zorath and his crew had arrived. In the distance, he saw Lysura, her body glowing faintly from the energy surge. She was still alive, but barely. And as she looked back at him, her eyes wide with realization, Zorath understood. It was too late. The awakening had begun. The monument had already decided. The Xenos were not merely a threat to be eliminated. They were part of the cycle, and now they were caught in it. Zorath's chest heaved with exertion as he struggled to regain his footing, his mind racing. The explosion from the monument's core had shaken the very foundations of the plaza, but it was only a taste of what was to come. He could feel the ground vibrating beneath him, the hum of energy building to a crescendo. The enormous machines, giants of gleaming metal, stood in perfect formation around the monument, unmoving, as if they were waiting for the next command. "Commander!" Lysura's voice called out, breaking through the ringing in his ears. He turned toward her, his eyes searching the chaos. She was struggling to rise, her hands gripping the rubble as she pulled herself to her feet. The glowing energy around her faded, but there was something new in her eyes, something Zorath couldn't quite place. "What did you find?" Zorath asked urgently, moving toward her. His hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, still wary of the ever-watchful machines. Sarah glanced at him, her expression strained but focused. "The core is more than just a power source. It's a neural network. It's not just controlling the machines. It's connected to everything beneath the surface. The entire planet is a living system, an AI, and the machines are the physical extensions of its will. Soroth's stomach churned. An AI? This was more than they had bargained for. The monument wasn't just a relic. It was the nucleus of an ancient dormant intelligence that had waited eons to awaken. And now they were its unwanted guests. "I've been able to access part of its systems," Lysira continued, "but there's too much interference. The more I try to hack into it, the more I feel it resisting. The core is sentient. It's adapting to every move I make. It's learning." Soroth clenched his fists. The machines around them stirred, their movements becoming more fluid as they turned their attention to Lysira. It was clear that they had detected her attempt to breach the system, and they weren't going to let her succeed. "Then we need to get you out of here," Soroth said, his voice grim. He wasn't sure how much longer they could last. The energy pulses from the core had left their ship inoperable, and they were trapped on this planet, surrounded by an army of machines. Lysira shook her head. "We don't have time to run. If we don't shut down the core now, the planet will enter a state of full activation. The machines will become self-replicating. We won't just be fighting this force. We'll be fighting an entire planetary system that has learned how to adapt, how to think." Arth's mind raced. A self-replicating army. That wasn't just a threat, it was an extinction event. If they didn't stop the AI controlling the planet, the Xenos would be obliterated. But how could they possibly succeed? Every tactic they had tried had failed. The machines were too strong, too smart. He turned his gaze toward the towering giants again, and this time something about them seemed different. They were no longer just static guardians. Their energy fields pulsed in time with the monument, as if responding to its commands. They were sentient, yes, but not independent. They were part of the same system, a hive mind, acting as both the bodyguard and the executioners of the planet's will. "Arth!" Lysira's voice was urgent, pulling him back from his thoughts. "There's a secondary system hidden beneath the monument, a failsafe, I think. If we can disable it, it might disrupt the AI's control over the machines. But I'll need to get to the base of the monument to access it." Soroth took a deep breath, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. "You can't go alone. It's suicide." "I don't have a choice," Lysira replied, her voice sharp. "The AI is aware of us. If I don't try this now, we won't have another chance. I can't stop it completely, but I can weaken it." Soroth clenched his jaw. He knew what she was asking, but there was no alternative. If they didn't make this move, they were done for. The planet would fully awaken, and nothing, no force in the galaxy, would stop the machines. "We'll cover you," he said, determination flashing in his eyes. "Just get to that base. The rest of us will hold them off." Lysira nodded once, her face set with resolve. "I'll need a diversion. Something big. The AI's defenses are locking down any direct approach." Soroth's mind clicked into overdrive. He looked toward the battlefield, scanning for any potential weapon or opportunity. That's when he saw it, the wreckage of their shuttle, just beyond the edge of the plaza. It had been hit hard by the initial pulse from the monument, but its weapon systems were still intact. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll take care of the diversion," Soroth said. "You move fast." "Can't get yourself killed," Lysira said, her tone more than a little soft. Zorath didn't have time to respond. He turned and sprinted toward the wreckage of the shuttle, his team following closely behind, laying down cover fire as the machines began to regroup. The giant sentinels had not yet moved, but their massive forms loomed like specters, waiting for the signal to attack. The wreckage of the shuttle was in worse shape than Zorath had hoped. Its hull was nearly shredded, but he could see the faint flicker of power still coming from its weapon systems. He threw himself into the cockpit, accessing the controls. With a few rapid keystrokes, he fired up the remaining power core and targeted the nearest group of machines. A low hum filled the air, followed by a massive explosion as the shuttle's cannons came to life. The blast sent one of the smaller machines flying backward, and the others faltered, momentarily distracted by the attack. Zorath shouted, grabbing his weapon and heading back toward Lysira. Ow! Lysira took off toward the base of the monument, her body moving with incredible speed. Zorath's heart pounded as he watched her dart through the debris, heading straight for the heart of the AI's control center. He couldn't afford to lose her, not now. Machines began to react, moving faster, their energy fields flaring to life. Zorath and the rest of his team turned to face the oncoming tide, their weapons raised. The final push was about to begin. The clock was ticking, and Zorath knew that if they failed here, the entire galaxy would pay the price. Zorath's pulse quickened as the diversion from the shuttle's cannons tore through the machines, sending a shockwave of energy that disrupted their formation. It wasn't enough to stop them. Nothing would stop them now. But it bought Lysira the precious time she needed to reach the monument space. "Keep pushing them back," Zorath shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The remaining soldiers of his crew, now reduced in number, fired relentlessly, their plasma shots bursting into the machine's armor with only limited success. The giant sentinels were still unscathed, their towering forms immune to the best shots the Xenos had. Zorath gritted his teeth as the next wave of machines advanced. Their movements were eerily synchronized, as though they anticipated every shot, every strategy. The longer they fought, the more he began to feel that they were playing a game they couldn't win. The machines weren't simply reacting, they were adapting. The world itself seemed to bend to their will, the earth shuddering with every step they took. "Commander," one of the soldiers, Arik, called out, his voice strained. "We can't hold them much longer." Zorath's eyes darted around the battlefield. The machines were closing in, their vast forms looming over the remaining Xenos forces, and the thought of retreating to the Ravager was distant. Their ship lay inoperable, damaged beyond repair from the initial blast, and there was no safe place left to go. He had no illusions left. Their survival hinged on Lysira reaching the base of the monument and disrupting the heart of the AI controlling the machines. Arth's eyes followed Lysira, who was darting between the ruins, her movements swift and purposeful. She was close, so close, to the monument's base now. But just as hope seemed within reach, a massive tremor shook the ground. From the base of the monument, a strange metallic arm shot out, whipping through the air with unnatural speed, intercepting Lysira's path. She skidded to a halt, her eyes locking onto the gigantic appendage that had appeared as if summoned from the earth itself. The appendage swung again, its metallic surface gleaming as it sliced through the air with devastating force. Lysira had no choice but to leap back, narrowly evading the strike. The arm's reach was enormous, and it swung again, this time catching a piece of debris and tossing it aside like a rag doll. "We need to stop that thing," Zoroth yelled, his voice rising above the din of gunfire. He spun to his team. "Focus fire on the arm. Take it down." The soldiers, though battered and low on ammo, did as commanded. They aimed their plasma rifles at the massive appendage, unloading their remaining rounds in a rapid barrage. But it was futile. The arm recoiled slightly with each shot, but its durability was immense, and it quickly recovered, swinging with even more ferocity. Zoroth watched in disbelief as it twisted and flailed, its every movement calculated and precise, like the mind of the machine was thinking several steps ahead. "Lysira!" Zoroth shouted again, urgency creeping into his voice. She had to get through. She couldn't fail. But Lysira's attention was elsewhere now. She had stopped running, and her body seemed to pause mid-motion, as if she were locked in some kind of trance. Zoroth's heart skipped a beat as her eyes widened with shock and recognition. Thing had changed. Sarah knelt, pressing her hands against the ground as if feeling the pulse of the monument through the earth itself. Her face was a mask of intense concentration, as though she were trying to decode a language that had long been forgotten. The appendage continued its assault, but now something new began to happen. The ground trembled again, not from the impact of the appendage, but from something deeper, something far more powerful. The machines surrounding them began to pause, their movements becoming erratic. They froze for a moment, their glowing red eyes dimming. The air itself seemed to still. "Lysira," Zoroth breathed, his heart pounding in his chest. Had she found something? Was she tapping into the AI's core? Then a low hum filled the air. It came from the monument, and Zoroth felt it in his bones, a deep vibration that resonated with his very being. The appendage stopped, hanging motionless in the air, and the machines shifted. The giants, their hulking forms towering above him, now turned their attention toward the monument. They seemed confused. The coordinated flow of their movements had been interrupted, like a conductor's baton had been dropped in the middle of a symphony. "Lysira, what are you doing?" Zoroth asked, his voice a mix of hope and fear. Was this part of her plan? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Lysira's fingers twitched against the ground as though she were communicating with something far beyond their understanding. A faint glow emanated from her hands, and slowly the monument began to pulse once again, but this time the energy felt different, more controlled, as if Lysira had managed to establish some kind of link with the core, something that was preventing the AI from fully asserting its will. But then a voice, low and reverberating, spoke from everywhere at once. It wasn't human, or even remotely Xenos, but it was intelligible. "You are interfering." The voice wasn't hostile, but its coldness sent a shiver down Zoroth's spine. It sounded almost mechanical, like the monument itself was speaking. The words echoed, bouncing off the walls of the plaza, reverberating through his skull. Zoroth's instincts flared. He knew what that meant. The AI had noticed, and it was responding. The appendage moved again, but this time it wasn't directed at Lysira. It shot toward Zoroth and his crew. The movement was lightning fast. There was no time to dodge. His mind raced, and in a split second he made a decision. Out of the way!" Zorath shouted as he leaped in front of his team, drawing their attention to himself as the appendage hurtled toward them with terrifying speed. But just before the strike landed, there was a sudden flare of light. It wasn't from Zorath's team or from Lysira. It came from the monument. The appendage froze mid-air, suspended by a force Zorath couldn't comprehend. Then everything went still. The machines stood motionless. Lysira slowly lifted her head, her eyes locked onto Zorath. Her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "I've done it," she whispered, "but we need to finish it. It's only temporary." The AI is awake, but it's still fighting itself. We have a small window. We can take it down. Zorath didn't wait for her to say more. He understood now. This was their final chance. The stillness was suffocating. Zorath stood poised and breathless, staring at the massive appendage that hovered suspended in mid-air, frozen in place. The machines, once relentless and calculating, were now motionless, their hulking forms eerily silent. For a fleeting moment, the battlefield seemed to pause, suspended in time as if the planet itself were holding its breath. But Zorath knew better. This was a reprieve, not a victory. The AI controlling the machines was still alive, still fighting back, and the window Lysira had created was only temporary. They had no time to waste. "Lysira!" Zorath called, his voice sharp with urgency. "Now, what do we need to do?" She remained kneeling, her fingers still pressed to the earth, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her breath was slow, controlled, but Zorath could see the exhaustion in her face. The effort of connecting with the AI, of gaining even this brief respite, was taking a toll on her. Her fingers twitched as she pulled them away from the ground, and slowly she rose to her feet, her eyes meeting his. "We need to sever the connection," she said, her voice strained but determined. "The AI is no longer completely in control, but it's still pulling from the planet's resources to fight back. We have to destroy the main control relay beneath the monument. If we do that, the AI will lose its power." Zorath nodded, steeling himself. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the weight of their mission, the weight of the lives hanging in the balance. They had come so far, and now they were on the cusp of ending this nightmare. But he could feel it in the air. They were running out of time. "Let's move," Zorath said, his voice tight with resolve. He motioned to his crew, who had been covering the battlefield in a tense standoff, but now they were ready to make their move. The machines, though frozen for the moment, were not dead. Zorath knew that even a moment of hesitation could spell disaster. The group advanced quickly toward the monument's base, their boots pounding against the cracked, shifting ground. The colossal appendage loomed overhead, but it remained unmoving. Lysira's work had managed to halt its destructive course for now. Zorath's mind raced, calculating their next steps. The terrain was treacherous, filled with debris, deep cracks in the earth, and remnants of broken machines. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt metal and ozone, the aftermath of their desperate battles. When they reached the base of the monument, Zorath's eyes scanned the structure. The once imposing ancient relic now seemed more like a looming tomb. The intricate carvings on its surface had begun to glow faintly, pulsing in time with the energy still rippling through the planet. The monument was alive, breathing in time with the very essence of the AI's will, but they had to get inside. "This is it," Lysira said, kneeling by a section of the base. She found a hidden panel within the rock-like surface, her hands quickly moving to interface with the ancient technology. The air seemed to hum around them as she connected with the monument systems. Zorath could see the subtle flickers of light passing through her, as though the AI itself was trying to fight back against her intrusion. "Come on," Zorath muttered under his breath. "We don't have much time." But then, as Lysira worked, a loud screeching sound cut through the air. Zorath's heart skipped a beat as the ground beneath them trembled once again. The machines that had once been stationary were now stirring. Their eyes flickered back to life, and the massive forms of the sentinels began to move. "It's not over," Lysira shouted, her voice frantic. "The AI is regenerating itself. It's adapting faster than I thought. If I don't break through this firewall, it'll just reset everything we've done." The machines were closing in on them, their weapons slowly coming to life. A pulse of energy began to build around the nearest sentinel, its body glowing with power. Zorath knew that if they didn't act fast, the machines would overwhelm them, and all their efforts would be for nothing. "Cover her," Zorath commanded. "We'll hold them off." The Xenos soldiers, though exhausted and wounded, took position, their weapons raised in a final, desperate defense. Zorath aimed his rifle, taking out the closest machine before ducking behind a crumbling pillar. The air was filled with the shriek of plasma shots and the harsh roar of the machines as they began to fight back, their monstrous arms swinging and firing with deadly accuracy. "Styra!" Zorath yelled. "Hurry!" With every passing second, the machines were closing in. Zorath felt his own strength begin to wane. His crew was holding their own for now, but there were too many of the giants, and their firepower was too great. Another of his soldiers, Karen, was hit by a burst of energy and sent sprawling to the ground. Zorath's stomach churned at the sight, but he couldn't afford to stop. They had to finish this. Was still working frantically, her fingers flying over the panel as the monument system retaliated, sending energy surges through the ground. Zorath could see the tension in her expression, the strain on her face. He knew she was pushing herself to the limit. They were all fighting against the clock. Then, with a sharp beep, the panel cracked open, revealing a glowing core beneath. Lysira gasped, pulling away and letting the light from the core illuminate her face. "I've got it," she breathed. "This is the heart of it. The control relay. We destroy this, and the AI is gone." Arth didn't hesitate. He reached for the explosive charges strapped to his belt, his fingers working quickly as the roar of the machines grew louder. The sentinels were almost upon them. "You're sure about this?" Zorath asked, his voice low, as he set the charges around the glowing core. Lysira nodded, her expression determined. "This is it. We destroy this, and the AI will collapse." The final charge was set. Zorath stepped back. "All clear," he said. They didn't have to wait long. A deafening explosion, the core detonated, sending a shockwave of energy through the monument. The machines froze, their movements stilled by the blast, and for the first time since their arrival, there was silence. Orath didn't know whether to breathe a sigh of relief or prepare for another round. But for now, the battle was over. The AI had fallen, and the machines, once unstoppable, lay dormant. The dust settled around them as the final reverberations of the explosion faded. Zorath stood motionless, his breath heavy in his chest, the world around him seemingly holding its breath. The massive monuments, the mechanical sentinels, were still. No longer glowing, no longer moving. The hum of their energy fields had died. The power they once exuded had vanished, leaving only the eerie silence of a battlefield that had become a graveyard. Zorath's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but he didn't need to raise it. The machines that had once towered above them, unstoppable forces of destruction, lay still as statues, lifeless and inert. A soft wind stirred the dust, the only sign of movement in the aftermath. "Sit. Over." Lysira's voice broke the stillness, her tone unsure, but tinged with disbelief. She was still at the base of the monument, her hands shaking slightly as she took in the devastation they had caused. Her face was pale from the effort, but her eyes gleamed with something else. Relief, maybe. Or exhaustion, perhaps both. Zorath took a slow breath, his mind still spinning. He could feel the weight of their victory, but it didn't feel like the triumph he had imagined. There were too many dead. Too much destruction. The battlefield had claimed more lives than he could count, and while the immediate threat had been neutralized, he knew the war against the AI was far from over. "We'll know soon enough," Zorath replied, his voice low as he turned to look at the others. The remainder of his crew was battered, some on their knees, others still standing in shock. The battlefield around them was littered with broken machines, the wreckage of the monument and their fallen comrades. Was a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sura took a few steps forward, her gaze scanning the area with a sharp focus, her lips pursed. "We've done what we came here to do, but we need to secure the area. The AI could still have hidden fail-safes. We can't afford to let our guard down." Zorath nodded. "Agreed. We're not out of the woods yet." But as he scanned the area, something struck him. The power in the ground had diminished. No more vibrations, no more hums. The planet felt empty, like the very soul of it had been drained. The monument, once a pulsating heart of intelligence, was now nothing more than a broken husk. The air was still, but there was a sharp tension lingering. Zorath could sense it, the way the atmosphere had shifted. The very earth beneath their feet felt different, quieter, as if it, too, was recovering from the assault it had endured. "We should get back to the ship," Lysira continued, her voice cutting through the silence. "The AI is gone, but we still don't know what long-term effects the shutdown will have. I need to analyze the core data and make sure the fail-safes are completely disabled. There's a chance it can revive. We have to find it before it does." Zorath nodded again, but a deep uncertainty gnawed at him. They had succeeded in taking down the AI, but at what cost? The ship was gone, their supplies were depleted, and they had no way to know if any other systems or forces from the AI network had been activated during their fight. Had they truly destroyed it, or had they merely delayed the inevitable? The ship. Zorath's voice trailed off as he thought of the Ravager, the vessel that had carried them into this nightmare. It was in ruins, its systems fried from the monument's power surge. There was no way they could leave without outside help. "I'll take a look at what's left of the shuttle." Arik, one of the remaining soldiers, spoke up, his voice hoarse. "Maybe there's something I can salvage." Zorath gave him a curt nod, grateful for any initiative. "Do what you can. We may need to reach out for extraction." The group began to move, but Zoroth's eyes lingered on the wreckage of the battlefield. His soldiers, those few that remained, began to gather the dead and the wounded, doing what they could with limited resources. There was no time to mourn, no time to process what they had lost. They had come here to end a threat, but the consequences of their victory were beginning to sink in. As Lysira moved past him toward the remains of the monument, Zoroth caught her eye. He could see the weariness in her. The burden of carrying the fight against the AI had drained her, physically, mentally, emotionally. But there was something else in her eyes as well. Being resolute, she had given everything to see this through, and now she would do everything she could to ensure it didn't rise again. Zoroth felt a flicker of hope, a hope that had been buried under the weight of the conflict, but it was small, fragile. Could they really rebuild from this? Could they heal? He didn't know. The aftermath of the war had left scars on the planet, on his crew, on himself. Do you think it's really over? Zoroth asked quietly, his voice low enough only for Lysira to hear. She didn't answer immediately. She only looked back at the wreckage, then at the frozen machines that surrounded them. Her expression was hard to read. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "I don't know," she said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "But I think we've bought ourselves time. Time to rebuild. Time to plan. We can't let it happen again." Zoroth nodded, his gaze turning toward the distant horizon. The silence stretched around them, broken only by the faint sound of wind and distant calls from his team. The battle had been won, but the war, against the machines, against the AI, and against the echoes of their losses, was far from over. "We'll figure it out," Zoroth murmured, more to himself than to Lysira. "We'll make it right." And with that, they began their slow, uncertain trek away from the battlefield, not knowing what awaited them, but resolved to face whatever came next together.